Hi, I'm Arthur. And when it comes to Warhammer 40k, you could probably guess that there are a lot of Space Marines, probably too many. I know the standard count for all Loyalist Marines is supposed to be around 1 million, because 1,000 chapters with 1,000 Space Marines, but we know that's not actually the final tally. Black Templars have around 6,000 and so on. But in the Horus Heresy, 100,000 was the basic size for the legions of Space Marines that existed, rather than just, standard chapter size we have today. Some, like the Ultramarines, could reach up to 300,000 just because there was no cap, so there was a bunch of oddities here and there that I like to think about and I want to discuss with all of you. So what am I talking about? Well, there is this concept I really enjoy that I refer to as non-standard Space Marines, where they are Space Marines that, due to mutations brought on by their genetics interactions with the gene seeds, they have some weird, wacky, nonsense deviations. They range between internal issues and changes and being physically incredibly different from everyone else around them. They are relatively well known, but I hope to catch you off guard with at least one of these, so let's get the easiest one out of the way, at least the most well-known one. Tyberos the Red Wake is an anomaly of a Space Marine, so damn tall and wide set that most people get unnerved just looking at him move a little bit, because something that big should not be able to move the way he does, which is fast and explosive. Having heavily customized Terminator armor so that he can actually have a suit of power armor on, he stands so tall that when standing still in lore, he was described as looking like an old statue, and when he moved, the people who thought he was a statue almost shit themselves in fear. He's a well-known figure, being the chapter master of one of the most fan-favorited chapters of Space Marines known in existence. So it makes sense that he's well-known, having twin weapons that can only be described as covering your hands in glue and sticking them in a sharp objects bag. Tyberos is just the most easy one to get out of the way, though special mentions to another honorary big man, Alexis Pollux, who was described in lore as being so uncomfortably big that Rabute Gilliman, Primarch of the Ultramarines, was unnerved by him, because he was the only Space Marine that he didn't have to lower his head to make eye contact with. Side note, Alexis Pollux used a fucking power fist with an underslung meltagun, which just feels incredibly overkill for most situations, but what do I know? Maybe he needs it. So on to the more interesting bits. So one of the most fun Marines on this list, and one of the reasons I actually came up with the idea for this video, was I was looking at Space Wolf lore trying to plot out the next couple books I wanted to read. I came across this lad, Hagar the Mountain, a Space Wolf that, due to some kind of mutation, is able to actually out-eat his ultra-fast metabolism, which he often does because this boy loves his food. He is incredibly tall, so he is tall, wide, and girthy, described in lore as the only Space Marine to ever be considered fat by any stretch of the word. He is a brutal sort. And one thing you're going to notice about all these individuals is that for some reason, most of them have weird weapons or fighting styles. So for Hagar, he one-handedly uses a thunderhammer to maim and murder wherever he goes, even using it as a throwing weapon from time to time, just for fun. He has had to have his power armor modified with a special belly plate, because, he's incredibly fat. Though, don't get it twisted. This man isn't just fat. Standing about a head or two taller than the average Space Marine, he is described often as being more muscle than fat, so think of him more as peak condition Eddie Hall. The best way to look at him, aside from Eddie Hall, is to imagine him as Thor from God of War Ragnarok, because deadass, that is the level of fight you are in for if you cross this man. And if the wiki is anything to go by, he maimed a dreadnought once with his hammer, which is fucking insane to think about that he could go toe-to-toe with a dreadnought. His nickname, the Mountain, obviously comes from the sheer size of this man, and honestly, I kind of have this juvenile thought process of wishing I could see him fight more things one-on-one just to see who would win. The whole Japanese bug fighting mentality. It's like Pokemon with a big drunken Norse werewolf. So, on the opposite side of things, we have the short king to rule them all, Maximian Voss. Certified wide load. due to a defect either in his gene's ability to process gene seed or his gene seed in general. Maximian Voss was incredibly short for a Space Marine, which, although isn't really that short in general, him being at 6'9" or some shit is still weirdly short for these guys. Being born with a shortness the likes no other of his brothers have ever seen, he accepted his lot in life and then pushed himself to the utmost. You ever go to a gym and you see that 156 guy with a shaved head and a beard pushing more weight than anyone else in the gym, but looking like he's about to explode the whole time? Yeah, that's Maximian Voss. He pushed his body harder than any other Space Marine ever could, and all in an attempt to make up the gap for being a short king. He put on so much muscle over time, they had to modify his power armor quite a few more times than standard just to make up for the fact that he keeps putting on more muscle. He was actually asked to stop lifting by one of his captains, because they just didn't really want to keep wasting the resources to make a new suit of power armor. But I assume his reply was a swift go fuck yourself and also hand me that mask gainer shake over there. Another fun fact is his nickname was the Omni, because much like every other short man in history, he had to skill max his way out of being called a manlet, so he ended up being super fucking good at almost everything. Tech, weapons, combat, being able to bench like 30 plates, you name it, he had pretty much an aptitude for it, which is kind of cool. As you'd expect for someone built that wide, he preferred heavy weapons like heavy bolters, multi-meltas, assault cannons, so on and so forth. Another non-standard Space Marine that I really want to talk about is Saravan of the Vergantes. He is a member of the Emperor's Spears chapter of Space Marines, and his weirdness comes from the fact that the process they used to make him a Primaris Marine from scratch was imperfect. They had not had the resources to completely do it from the beginning, and nor did they have the knowledge of how to implant the alpha and beta phases of the Primaris implantation. So because of that, his body came out deformed, one side of his body being completely locked up in this state of paralysis, even his face constantly put into a bit of a rictus grin. He is a depressing character, not lacking any of the cognitive abilities of a normal Space Marine, but still having an inability to mix with any of the traditional Space Marine armors. He is kind of a sidelined character, and I plan to do a deep dive on him relatively soon. But I do think he's an interesting example of a deformed Space Marine being allowed to live, because he was actually put in command of an important Space Marine vessel of his chapter known as the Hex, which is kind of cool. So the last Marine I really want to cover is one that's kind of a friend of the channel, if you will. Essentially, this mutation isn't really an external one, but more of an internal process of the body. Talos Valkyron. For some fucking reason, his body was able to process gene seed from the progenoid glands forever, which is not a good thing. Basically, the chemicals that come from the progenoid regulate and make it so the rest of the organs take on the desired traits per Space Marine Legion, as well as make sure the organs acclimatize to the body. Now, that is a bit of a reductive way of looking at it. There's a lot more to it than that, but you get what I mean. Because his body wouldn't stop processing gene seed, he was able to develop new abilities that were both harmful and helpful. Because his Legion was the Night Lords, he was able to gain the powers and mindset of his gene father, Conrad Kurz. Now, you could probably see why that's a bad thing and a good thing. In short, he could see the future, and it's pretty damn accurate as well, at least in the beginning. But the issues here was that as these abilities developed, he would start getting splitting headaches and seizures that would cause him to black out for increasingly long portions of time, sometimes being for 20 minutes in the beginning, but eventually ending up being months. It was because his body was not equipped to have this level of gene sophistication in it, so his brain was slowly ripping itself apart, trying to be more like his Primarch, to the point where midway through the book series, he's in an emergency surgery to prevent him from dying from a brain bleed. It is only a temporary fix, of course, but it does work for a while. In essence, you could look at this mutation of him being closer and closer to his Primarch father, but that does have some setbacks, like, the visions, and also love the skinning of people to death, which I'm told is a bad thing. Technically, because the gene seed of his progenoid glands is so processed, it led to the creation of one more non-standard space marine who was the child of a common slave and a navigator, which are already warp-touched. Being implanted with Talos' gene seed led to him having all of the benefits of the foresight abilities Talos had, while not having any of the drawbacks that we know of. But we know barely anything about him because he was given a single epilogue that was basically just a few paragraphs at the end of the book series. And those were some non-standard Space Marines. I enjoy the idea of them being weird outliers because it's very interesting to see how other Space Marines treat them and how they specifically act around other Space Marines. You can assume with people like Tyberos that they would have a bit of an air of superiority, but with people like Voss, you kind of have to wonder if they felt like they were underperforming in such a way that pushes them to do the things they do. So what do you think of these outliers that I have covered? Cool? Not cool? Do you have any that I may have missed that you think would be interesting? This is avoiding things like chaos mutations and whatnot. It's just a Space Marine that has a natural weirdness to their build, but I assume I missed a few because it's pretty common for something that is so uncommon. So let me know in the comments, as well as remember to like and subscribe as it helps the channel. Thanks to my channel members for supporting me, and once again, thanks for watching. Till next time.